Performance reviews. Let's break them down. For plenty of organizations, right now is performance review season. So managers may be getting ready to deliver reviews, employees may be having to perform their own self-review, or just sitting and wondering, how's it going to go? Now, a lot of times, the idea of performance reviews makes people groan, from managers getting ready to deliver them, to employees who are worried about, is this going to impact me? Am I going to get a promotion or at least a pay increase? And there's so much unknown or even dread. But that's the opposite of what should be happening. Ideally, a performance review is a time to actually look back on the performance that an employee has shown and give them tips and expectations about what to do in the future and help them grow. So why is it such a check-the-box exercise? In this video, I'll talk about the top 10 mistakes that I've seen, especially having been head of HR and general counsel, and things that managers can do to avoid those mistakes and make performance reviews a lot less stressful and a lot more helpful. Number 1 is giving vague feedback. Now, frequently, I'll look at performance reviews for organizations I don't work at, I've never worked at, I may know nothing about. But I read that review and I can tell the manager, this person's going to have no idea what you're talking about. Because the feedback doesn't have specifics, it's just vague. Things like, you need to be more professional, or you need to have better performance. All the time. When you look at these, then a manager may have explanations behind that. Oh, well, for this person, this is what it means. And often I'll hear, well, they'll know what I'm talking about. But it's important because frequently performance reviews, which can often include a written part that's like a form or narrative that a manager writes, but then also a conversation where it's delivered. And both are very important. But frequently, managers will write things down because they think, like, they'll know what I'm talking about. Everybody knows that this is how we talk here. But they're important for a couple reasons. One is, the game of telephone can mean that as your team member is looking at it, you as a manager may think they know exactly what that means, but they may have no idea. Things like being professional, being strategic, having better performance. That doesn't actually translate into what's expected of that person. The other is, for performance reviews, sometimes third parties may be looking at these. I've seen this in my lawyer life. When I had to look at a performance review, and it may be a situation when someone was terminated from employment, and so all the documents, everyone's looking at them, potentially a judge and potentially jurors, and you look at it, in reading on paper, you're like, this doesn't really have any specifics. This sounds like a good employee. And the manager may say, like, no, but this is kind of problematic. Well, they're going into this whole story about what the employee did, but none of it is on the paper. And so it's important, and often you're hopefully not getting to the courtroom part of it, but just from the fairness perspective, it's so important both in the written document and then being able to go into examples to that employee so they understand both the positive and any of the critical feedback, what they're doing well, so that they know, okay, this is what I need to do more of, this is what your expectations of me are to adjust. So for example, in a sales team member, you may say, like, you need to increase your sales. Okay, how are they going to do that? If you and your team have a formula that you've used all sorts of data, like you need to have 25 calls that you're making a day or a week and have X many appointments, and that tends to lead to this many in sales, specifying that and explaining what's expected of them and what they're doing, and identifying what's on them and then what you can help support. So as a manager saying, it's on you to do the sales activity, but let's meet together to go through your scripts and talking points so that I can identify any areas that we've seen with other team members be helpful. And we can have a team meeting talk about that. Giving those specifics of what you're looking at, the good and maybe the bad that you've seen about their performance, but also being specific. So it's not just vague language. So having the question to yourself, if I were a third party looking at this, would I have any idea what the performance actually is and what's expected? Number 2 is being too nice. And what I mean by that is, as a manager, you're generally not going to be there just to be like, yes, 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 but it's to use your experience. That's often why people get promoted into a role. You were good at that role, or maybe you were hired in as a manager. You had experience elsewhere. Your organization and your team members are looking to you for your experience and to help them actually meet goals and develop, not just in their current role, but in their career. And so if you're not giving feedback that you seeing ways that they could try something differently, do better, or flat out they're not doing what's expected, not having those conversations can be natural. Because as a manager, you may think, well, I want my team to like me. This feels badly. especially if you have friendships with your team members. You may think, like, I don't want to be mean. And so frequently, it's softening the language so much that it, again, doesn't read clear. Just like being vague, it's like being too nice. And so you're only talking about all the positive things and maybe wrapping them together. Like people talk about a compliment sandwich. You may be stuffing that sandwich with like extra fluffy bread, and there's no meat in the inside or meat alternative, but meaning that you're not talking about what they need to work on. And so sometimes you may do that because you feel uncomfortable, or you may worry about a team member. You may have a team member that's cried every time they've gotten feedback, and you're like, I can't do that. Or you don't know what to say, and so you're worried about how they can feel. And so sometimes it's just including that and saying exactly as I started this section, which as a manager, my job is to help you not just do the job and understand that, but also how to develop in your career. And that can be helpful if you're giving someone feedback on something you've noticed for a while, or maybe they've been doing for a long time, even before you were their manager. But saying, I want to give the feedback to help you develop, and so they understand exactly what's expected. And so in these situations, it's thinking about reading through a review and thinking through the talking points and knowing that supporting someone and helping them do their job better, get results, and develop in their career, that's actually a lot nicer than not saying it at all. Number 3 is surprise, bringing issues up out of nowhere. Now, frequently as a manager, one of the things I see is that the performance review has feedback, and it may be true, it may be talking about something that happened, but the problem is the manager never really addressed it with that team member, or it's been a really long time since it happened. And so as you're bringing it up in a review, the employee's reading through it and thinking, wait, okay, you gave me a specific example, but this is it? You didn't even tell me that this was a problem. That's why having ongoing feedback is so important. Having one-on-one time with your team members. And what that looks like can vary. You may be in an office or corporate environment where you're sitting, whether it's in a conference room or remote, having time, like half an hour a week or something like that, and having that scheduled time. You may be in more like shift environments, healthcare, retail, warehouse, and so checking in with team members. And so whether you're having that check-in time or you're walking around and giving that actual feedback can be helpful to avoid things being a surprise. Because I can tell you, if you're delivering that review and you think, okay, I've given this is true, this has all happened, but the team member hasn't heard about it aside from the review, or the review's for like a year-long period, and you focused like a third of the review on something that they did 11 months ago, thinking about how that can feel to a team member. And so a couple things. One is that if someone did a mistake or something that 11 months ago, you may think about that in their review as you're putting things together. You may have an organized list of accomplishments and challenges through the year, all those things to make your life easier in reviews. You may also be thinking about it on the fly. So as you think about something they did, you think, okay, they really messed that up 11 months ago, so I got to include that in their review. Well, a flip of that is to think, especially if it was a long time ago, how could that actually be a positive in their review? And what have they done since then? And so using that for a team member and talking about it and what they've done since. Like if they had a huge gaffe on a client presentation, like totally messed it up, what they've done since. And so thinking about mistakes or things that you can bring up from the past, also thinking about that flipping from a negative to a positive. So how can you use this as an opportunity to talk about growth? Because if you bring things up and haven't talked about it to your team members, or it was a long time ago and there's been no discussion since, your team member is likely really going to have a reaction, either in the moment or right after they get out of their review meeting and they're telling their friends and family, like, can you believe this? Number 4 is comparing them to other people. Now, as a manager, you may think at times, and times you may have stack ranking. What that looks like is, as a manager, you may have if you have 10 team members, you may be told by the organization, okay, you can give this many 3s, this many 4s, this many 5s. You have to put people into buckets. And it's important to know that and understand that and what that looks like in your conversations with team members. But whether you have stack ranking or you're just thinking about your team members, it's really common to think about people compared to the others. But part of the problem is, if in your review in particular, you start talking about this and saying, be more like this person, you may be doing that to give them an example of what to do and to give them a guideline or a model. But especially if you're doing that in the review, what you're creating is really drama between your team members because you're telling the person in front of them, like, you're not doing it like this person. And so whether it's thinking of employee privacy and talking about different people's performance, but also really just the human nature of it's a whole different conversation to hear from your manager what you've been doing, your good performance, your worst performance, all of those things, and thinking about that objectively and giving that feedback. When you have that conversation one-on-one with your manager, it's totally different if that's framed in terms of other employees, both from a negative, if you're told you need to do it more like this person, or even as a manager, you may want to tell your team members, like, you are the best on the team at this. But what can happen is, especially at work, if your team, that may mean a lot to them, they may go out and tell other people, like, well, they told me I was the best on the team. Well, one, much like a reality show, if you're saying that to different people, they're probably going to come back to you and be like, why are you both telling us that they're the best? But also, other team members hear that, and it can just knock them down. And so already at work, people are on the same team, and it can feel like they're not. If one person is constantly like, oh, you're the best, they're so amazing at this, it can make everybody else feel like the worst. But bringing in individuals to compare them to can be completely unhelpful if you're trying to give, like, this is an example of what to do, talking about those objective behaviors rather than be more like this person. Number 5 is passing the buck to someone else. What this can look like is if you are giving direct feedback to someone, but you've gotten that feedback from somebody else or more than one person, in your mind you think, okay, I'm going to let them know how I got it. So it's not really, feels a little softer, not coming from me, but to know it's from other people. You may do that because, one, it can feel better and more human to deliver feedback but kind of point to somebody else as being the cause. So you're more good cop and they're bad cop. Or on the flip side, you may think this helps validate it by saying, it's not just me seeing this. I've heard this from so many other people. But if you tell a team member, okay, I got feedback from XYZ person on this, and say, or this person told me, whatever, give them the feedback. All of a sudden, it's hard for that employee to focus on the feedback that you're saying. What their thought goes to immediately is, wait, all these people are having conversations about me, and so they may be bringing in all sorts of context. They can feel really railroaded. Like, okay, so what are these conversations I'm not a part of? I'd like to be able to speak up for myself. And so in a review, talking about, in part of what you may be doing is having to get feedback from other people, but really drilling into that as much as you can. Like, okay, getting a sense of what's going on. Is that true? Is that fair? What's the real perspective? So when you're giving the perspective or that feedback, you're talking about things like in this report. And so you've been able to look at things for yourself and owning it and giving the feedback of, this is what you've been doing, XYZ, this is what we'd expect. So rather than saying, someone else told me this, then, or all these people have given this feedback of XYZ, walking them through the specifics. And if someone starts challenging and saying, like, well, who'd you hear that from? Because you weren't a part of that conversation. Then you can think about it in advance. Okay, how can I frame that? Do I have all of the information? It can be really important. But that's why doing that in advance of a review, so that you're delivering it about objective feedback and not just blaming somebody else or trying to justify yourself by pointing to a bunch of people who are all saying the same thing. Number 6 is getting personal. What I mean by that is can be jumping to conclusions. So if you have a team member that's been showing up late and making mistakes, you may think to yourself, something must be going on at home. And so in that review, you talk about things and saying to them exactly that. Like, is something going on at home or something else going on that's causing these things? The problem with that is that may be true. You may be totally correct. It may be something with that team member, things like with family members otherwise. But if you jump to that and have that assumption and really bring that into their conversation at work, employees can feel really defensive. And they may not want to have that conversation. And so focusing on specifics, the things that you noticed, you've been coming in late and you've been making mistakes, it's really important that, again, we show up on time because of XYZ if you do have that starting time, and also the mistakes. And what you can do, whether it's stepping away and looking at it again to make sure that you're reviewing it before you're actually done. But asking questions. If you do wonder, like, okay, I want to support my team member, just saying, like, what's your perspective and what do you think's, have you noticed these things and what can we do to, whether it's on the mistakes, what can we do to make sure that it's cleaner moving forward, or is there something in the way of getting to work on time that I can help you with? And so asking questions in that way can at least open up the conversation. And again, your team members may open that up. As a manager, you may have all sorts of abilities of things you can know how to talk to them with, talk comfortably with. And so if someone does start bringing these things up in a performance review, it can be helpful to say, this review, we put it together based on things like mistakes and showing up late. That being said, I want to support you. So we can talk about it and what we can do. And, this isn't just a one-time conversation, but I want to make sure that we're talking about all of this so this isn't just a blip in time. We can always come back together and think about things, but I just want to point out what I'm seeing and get a sense of what I can support you with and make sure that you're aware of what the expectations are moving forward, if there's anything you need. There can be ways of asking and identifying, again, whether it's professional things going on or employee that is no, I got the message. Okay. Those kind of conversations can happen all the time in performance reviews. And so also your internal team can always help to get a sense of what resources there are, what you can actually do to help as a manager. So it's always helpful to, whether it's pausing the conversation if someone brings up something unexpected, but just knowing everything doesn't have to be solved right in the performance review, but focusing on the objective, observable things and not jumping to conclusions can help make that a lot more possible. Number 7 is assuming that you have all of the information. Now, how this can happen is if you're delivering a review and you're talking about things, and maybe these are totally observable, like this employee was late in delivering 3 different really critical initiatives. But what if that employee then says, okay, but I was waiting on 4 other people who were also late getting me their parts. They delivered those past my own deadline, so what was I supposed to do? This is why also not having things be a surprise can be so important, and having those ongoing reviews and feedback and talking about things in the moment. So when someone was late on a report, getting a sense of what's going on, and that at times when you're working with other people, you are going to deal with them being late or not giving information or not delivering it in the way that you need. But communication is so important, and a lot of that can be addressed well before the review. But so making sure in any situation with your team members, you are having a sense. And so if someone's late, having that question of, okay, this was supposed to be delivered 2 days ago. What's going on? Is there anybody else you're waiting on, or what's getting in the way of getting it done? And asking that in a way that shows your support, not just assuming it's all on the employee and it's all their fault, but letting them know, again, sometimes you're going to have to be working with other people and they're going to need your help figuring out how to navigate that and how to have conversations, especially if someone's senior to them, they're not getting things back and the employee's I don't want to get in trouble with this boss, following up with them. But they can use your help with that. And so approaching those conversations with what you see as errors and misses, making sure that you have all of the information and understanding that well ahead of the review. Because few things feel less fair than a review where the employee's no, this does not tell the full story. Number 8 is not holding employees to the same standard. So just like we talked about on your team, whether you have stack ranking or otherwise, you may naturally think about team members okay, who's my best performer and who's maybe not, but you also may think of them differently, including based on things like how well you know someone, whether it's how long you've worked together, whether you have a personal relationship, you're really friendly outside of work. And so making sure that you're being objective. And so thinking as much as possible, objectively for any role. If you're going to come down on someone in the performance review in particular, is that feedback that you would give to them if they were your favorite employee in the whole organization? And making sure that you're looking objectively as possible. And that's where thinking of feeling too nice, it can be hard if you have friends that are on your team and you're managing them. But it's so important that you treat people consistently. And so it may mean okay, I'm thinking of that consistently, but okay, the whole idea of my sales team, I have a brand new salesperson. Should I look at them exactly as I should a 10-year sales employee? No, not necessarily. If there's other objective criteria, if someone is literally still training and getting up to speed, or if someone's moved into a new role or things like that, again, objectively, it's reasonable to know they're going to have a bit different skill set. But making sure that aside from those factors, would it sound fair? And if different people were looking at each other's performance reviews, the way that you're talking, so the language and the ratings that you're giving, is that actually objective? Or are you bringing some of whether it's a bit of favoritism or a bit of I don't like this person and so this is going to be my opportunity to get them out the door? Managers at times can do that in performance reviews, and just being really mindful. This is just like it's not time to be a surprise. It's not a time to use this as like, okay, I don't like this person, and so I'm going to get them out just like Al Capone was convicted of tax evasion, so get them on a technicality. It really isn't the time, and that's not overall what leads to performance. If someone feels like they're being unfairly targeted, oftentimes that's going to lead to a lot bigger issues between you and that employee than just delivering this review and thinking it's going to be simple. Number 9 is not following up. Performance reviews should not feel like a blip in time. They can often feel exhausting because as a manager, ideally, you're making your life easier and being fair to team members by having running, like whether it's tools or lists, things they've done well, challenges, all of that feedback over time. So when it comes to the review, it's easier to put that together. But realistically, what often happens is it's the review period and you're like, ugh, trying to think through what they've done over the last year or whatever that review period is. And so you can really cram that together, but it's so important to have that ongoing feedback and leading up to it. So when someone gets to the point of the performance review, again, there aren't surprises. Like they generally know how things went. But it's also important that it continue after the fact. And so when you deliver the review, using it as an opportunity to talk about what happened, but also set expectations for the future. And again, specific expectations. Like this is what it looks like. This is some of your goals. So these are the things we're going to do. I'm going to have you join me in meetings for things like this. Or I'm going to have you lead a session in our team meeting on XYZ. And it can be a lot easier to do that and say that in a performance review meeting. It's a lot harder to remember to actually do that, like the day after or the month after or the whole period after. And so using that as an ongoing document. It can help if you have systems that work into performance reviews. So that performance review, then you bring that into your next one-on-ones. But whether you have that, it makes your life easier, or you have things like shared documents, just making sure that you're noting what you've committed to, what they've committed to, those expectations, so you're following up on those. Because even like in the one-on-ones after that review, saying, okay, after, since that review, we talked about we do this, okay, this is a time to do that. Because employees, a lot of the feedback they're going to receive, a lot's going to be on them. There's going to be other areas where they need your support, but how someone chooses to take the initiative can often matter based on them looking and saying like, okay, is my manager actually doing this for me? Or you saying things that could sound nice in the review meeting, but you're not actually doing as well. And so just making clear with the employee the things that are expected of them, their initiative, so checking in with them on what they're doing, and then also making sure that you're highlighting some of the things that you're doing for them as well, and just quickly doing some of that, whether it's setting up a meeting, but then talking about it in the review or in the one-on-one, in focusing on the things that you've committed to, can helpful and make them motivated to actually want to do that and improve their performance over time. Number 10 is not addressing things at all. This is kind of like trying to be too nice. And what this looks like is, let's imagine, you have a bunch of reviews to write, you're trying to think of things, you're going through your team members, and as you think about things, you're like, okay, yeah, this has been going on a year. Honestly, it's been going on longer than that. I probably should use the occasion to address it now. But just like yourself, if you might make a to-do list in a morning, write things down, and then you never get to that item, you may think to yourself, I should be doing this, but I'm not going to. Hopefully they'll fix it in the next year. But knowing that level of feedback and things that people need to hear and giving examples of it and really addressing it is so important to do. It can be hard. If something has been an issue for a really long time and you think to yourself, okay, now it just feels really unfair to ever bring this up at all, those are things that can be helpful. I have talking points of bringing that up and saying, I should have brought this up earlier, but it's important that you understand XYZ. That can be a quick way to own, like you should have done something in advance. And thinking about as well, talking to your organization, to your boss, to your people team, HR, whatever that looks like, to have a sense of, if there's feedback, how do I deliver that if it feels unfair because they've honestly been doing it a long time and bringing up on the performance review now? It may be a situation where someone says, like, okay, don't bring it up and don't ding them on the review, but still give them that feedback. Feedback, again, the best time to give it is in the moment. When you see it, talking about it, if you start to see it multiple times, okay, addressing it, things like that. But the second best time is going to be now so that they don't continue to do that in their job now, throughout their career. And so making sure that you're having the conversations. Begin thinking about what goes into that performance review and that rating. If it's feedback that you've really been holding off on, how can that be incorporated or not into their review, but still give that feedback and make clear where things are part of the review and where they aren't. Because this can be a time, again, even though it shouldn't be such an exhausting exercise, it can be a time to have conversations that you may have been putting off, or you may have taken on this employee recently and thinking, no one's giving them this feedback. But so thinking about how to do that, and that sometimes something may play into their rating, it may not, because again, it would not be fair if no one's brought this up to them before. But having the conversation in any way they can, and that you can absolutely help make that performance review be something that actually helps the team member grow. You may watch these tips and think, I have a lot of work to do. But whether you feel pretty good about delivering reviews and feedback, or you think, okay, this is a skill I need to develop, that's going to happen for every manager. Because it is a skill and it takes time. But investing time in your team members, whether it's now, getting ready for reviews to make sure that they do feel clear and fair, and talking about what you'll commit to. If you haven't been giving ongoing feedback like you wish you had, or thinking about, okay, I haven't been giving feedback that maybe considers other perspectives, or asking my team member for more information or things like that, if there's things that you need to commit to your team members and decide to, this can be the time to do it. You can turn a new leaf, but investing that time will pay off. It helps you as a manager and a leader because it becomes a lot more efficient and feels a lot more fair as you deliver feedback when you feel better about having those conversations in the moment, so some things don't have to end up in a formal review because they learned it more quickly in the moment. But also understanding how to talk about the things that they're doing well and how to do that more often. Think about how they can train others to really make sure that that has ripple effects across others on the team. But investing your time into making sure performance reviews provide the level of feedback that employees deserve and need to be able to grow in this job and their careers, that's what leadership really is. If you ever want more resources, we'll include them in the description. We have things like Manager 101 course or performance toolkits for organizations to help you train your managers on having more root cause conversations. But however you do it, just knowing performance management, performance feedback isn't always easy, but it can become a lot easier over time.